Welcome back to another episode of How It Works. Hello, my name is Ken Baker from Green Pro Solutions. Today, we're going to be talking about a manifold system. Now, this is a 5500 Chevy slash Isuzu or Hinu combination of that. It's about an 800-gallon unit. We call it a Titan 2 because of its volume. So if you have a truck similar to this, a box truck, you may have this type of manifold system. Some of them will only have one manifold in one engine. This particular unit has, again, two manifolds and two engines. The reason that is that this truck is designed to do high canopy sprays, taller trees, and also low bed sprays, barks, and soil injections and things of that nature. So it gives an option here to use the smaller manifold and smaller pump independently. Now these manifolds are stainless steel. Most of the parts are brass fittings. They have poly fittings that have fork fittings that come off and they pull out, which this one's not working, and it has easy access to be able to take off your hoses, put them back on in maintenance. Really nice feature when it comes into the field when you want to do any maintenance or drainage or weatherization. Comes in very handy. Now these manifolds are designed very, very specific. As you can see, they have a suction, they have a return, and they have a high pressure. The way a system works with your pump and motor is that your pump requires fluid from somewhere. So in this case, I have the handle turned to 110, which is the front tank in front there. It's going to take it from the 110, and the pump is taking that product into the pump, and now it's got to go somewhere. The most important part of this is where does it go, and you have to make sure before you start your engine and your pump that you have your return open. So in this case, you have a pumping from the 110 to the 110, which is the return. So all it's doing right now is cycling through the pump. And it's just staying right here, it's sucking in here, going to the pump, coming back, returning to here, just cycling. It's kind of deceiving, like, oh, how's that happening? Because you have a suction, you have a return. How's that making that connection? Well, if you look at the pump, which is another episode, you have a suction port on the pump. The fluid goes in there, then it comes out the other part of the pump and comes back on that line. And then it circulates through and it does its cycle. Now, a part of the manifold system is once you have the suction return, you have a high pressure. So using this regulator, you can actually change that pressure. Say it's cycling through naturally at 10, 15 psi. You can use your regulator, engage your regulator, and then you can turn this particular one all the way up to 550 or so psi. So this gives you the ability to spray higher, like 60 feet, 55, 60 feet, depending on prevailing winds. You could, and depending on what kind of gun you wish to put on the end, like a JD9 or turbo or a bean gun, can give you different heights and different types of spray. So this will enable you to control the pressure. Now, on the motor, which we shared in another episode, you can have your RPMs, regulate that to anywhere from a couple hundred RPMs to 2,400 RPMs, 3,200 RPMs. And in conjunction with this, which is your PSI, your pressure, working with those two numbers and engaging the proper pressure, you can do as little applications of having it at 100 PSI and 300 RPMs to do low ground cover. You necessarily don't need to have this maxed out at 550 and have it at 2,400 RPM to apply your application. That's where the skill sets come in, what products you're using, what guns you're using to be able to maximize the ability of this manifold and use it for small applications as well. So it's a very universal system. Now, when you have you're engaged your engine and your pump, you have your suction and return open, and you have your pressure regulated. Then you have your valve here, where this particular manifold only has one hose hooked up to it. So once the pressure is set, you engage your hose. Now all that pressure is going to go into your hose. Your valve is shut, so now this is ready to go. So basically shut your valve off, set your quick disconnect, take your gun, and engage your gun. So now you're ready to go. You can pull your hose out and apply your application. So at any point in time doing that, you need to regulate. You can turn down your pressure and to maximize the application. Now when you're done, it's very important when you're done and you come back with your gun, you're at the truck here, it's very important that you take your lower your RPMs on your engine first, and then you disengage your pressure. What will happen is if you disengage your pressure first, what's going to happen, your engine is going to be at a higher rev, RPMs, very loud and running because you took the load off of it, which is engaging the pressure. Some of this may seem a little complicated and difficult, but once you do it a few times, and this is why we're doing these videos, so you can play them, try it out, and on average it's like 2 or 3 days people get really adapted to the terminology and the applications of how to use these manifolds. So again, you lower your RPMs, you disengage your pressure, then you can turn your hose off and you're good to go. Some people like keeping open the suction and a return as a safeguard. As we talked in other episodes, if you don't have these open for such as return, you go to start to turn your pump, you could damage your pump very severely. So some people, they just leave these two open. Now, I'd not recommend opening more than one at a time, because what then happens is the product between the 110 gallon and the 55 will equalize itself, and chances are you'll overflow your tank, as it's doing right now. Perfect example. So you want to always make sure you just do one at a time. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the maintenance. There's very little maintenance. As I said, we have forklifts here that we can remove. We have actually spares installed. We try to think ahead, so when you're growing in your business, you have spares. You can actually add other tanks, another hose reel, and do other types of things that gives you the ability to have a lot of flexibility. So don't be concerned with these spares. Now what we also have is a pop-off. Now what this pop-off does is we have 2 safety features for the return. Say if you do have this off partially, or you don't have it open all the way, this will open and bypass, giving you a little bit of flexibility. I don't want you to depend on it, but it will help in the case that you don't open the return. It's only momentary. If you leave it run for any long periods of time, you will damage the pump. There is another safety we talked about in another series or another episode, is on the filter. There's a vacuum breaker. That vacuum breaker too will help in the case of having no product through your suction, and it will suck air and not product. Again, that's in another episode when we talked about the filter system. At the end of the season, what people tend to do, they want to weatherize their vehicle. So again, we use these fork fittings, that you can take out the forks, pull this down, drain your system that way. And again, there's another episode for weatherization, so I won't go into great detail with that, but that's why some of these hoses are here. These fork fittings. There's a valve here, which we call our blow-off. Now this could be used for a couple different things. Now when you're running a system starting up at the beginning of the season, or you run the tank very low and it's empty, you're going to be pumping air. And that's a lot of cavitation. Cavitation means there's just a lot of excess moving, bouncing of the hoses, shaking of the engine and the pump. And that's because typically there's air in the system. And that's what the pump is trying to do. It's sucking from the tank, and there's very little water in there. Or in some cases, when you have your running at a high pressure, high RPM, and it's pumping 36 gallons a minute and you only have a little bit of water in there, it's actually going to start sucking from the surface, which well they call a vortex. So it's always better to keep your tank as full as possible. And if you do run it dry, what I would recommend is you're running the system and it's cavitating and shaking. Just open these valves a little bit, crack them a little bit. They have a safety here. Crack it a little bit, and it's going to spit and spurt a little bit, and it's going to go flow. And same thing with the suction. You open it a little bit, and it's going to spit, and eventually flow nice, and the cavitation and vibration will eventually go away. Now, so you don't get your truck all dirty, we have an extension hose that you can actually put on the blow-offs. So when you are bleeding it, I call bleeding it or burping it, you can use either one of those terminologies. You can blow it off, and it will help prevent the cavitation. These, like I said, these are stainless steel. The overall unit itself does not need any maintenance. Weatherization, like I said, there's a technique of weatherizing it, and we'll do that at a later episode. Now, notice one here is a bigger, same principle as this. There's one connection between them. It literally is a link. If you see here a link and a link. So the way we've designed this is that link system, say this manifold only has to do with a 110-gallon tank, which is in front, and a 55-gallon, which is here. So this manifold alone only controls 2 tanks. By utilizing the link system, which actually connects this to this manifold, I can use the small engine with this manifold pulling from these other 2 tanks. So it gives the ability to use, again, when I was talking about in an earlier episode with the hose reels, you can use not only this manifold with that engine with this hose reel. Now by the link system, I can use this manifold with these tanks using that motor on this reel as well, and vice versa. So this link system has become a very valuable tool to be, again, very universal. If you're using 2 different people on this truck, you can use 2 different hoses pulling from 2 different manifolds from 2 different tanks simultaneously. What I failed to mention, it's going to be a little bit easier here with all the tanks, but over here you can typically the 400-gallon tank, again, that's in another episode, is your nursing tank. So you can actually pull from here, and you don't have to return it to the 400. You can return it to the 250. So it will pull from the 400 and go to the 250, and the same thing with the 15. You can do the same thing. Or you can pull from the 250 and go to go from the 400 to the 250. Now it's very important when you go to switch your handles. If you notice, I opened the one that is going to first, then close this. Do it somewhat simultaneously so you don't cross-contaminate one product from one tank to the other. As you do, you just make a great gradual switch like that, and you're actually making a transition to where you'll limit the air in the system. The pump may agitate a little bit, but I think you'll be okay. So I think that's it. Like I said, these are 2 of the same things. This has a larger regulator, does the exact same thing. This regulator here will go up to 750 psi with a larger pump and motor. Again, this one here is probably going to go to 500, 550 with a smaller pump and motor. So I think this episode, the end of this episode with manifolds. Thank you for joining us for another episode of How It Works.